How do we equip our families with a biblical worldview? How do we prepare the next generation for life? How do I grow in my walk with the Lord and in my marriage? If you wrestle with these questions, you are in the right place to find answers. Welcome to the Entrusting the Faith podcast. Welcome to the Entrusting the Faith podcast. I am your host, Eric Rutherford, and I'm excited today because I have with me S.D. Smith. He is the author of the Green Ember series, which it's just a best-selling middle grade adventure saga. He has reached just hundreds of thousands of readers with this. He's also a speaker, just speaking about and teaching about storytelling, imagination. He's also the creator of the Green Writing course. So lives in West Virginia with his wife and 4 kids. 2 quick items before we get to our interview. First, if you go to our website at entrustingthefaith.com, scroll down to the bottom, sign up for our weekly emails so you know who is coming up on the podcast for the week and who you may have missed the previous week. You'll also get a free resource when you do, and you can find all our other podcasts on our website while you're there. Feel free to scroll through them, find other interviews to really help you along the way. Second, this episode is just brought to you by my book, Leading While at Home, How Husbands and Fathers Can Biblically Lead Their Families. So if you've ever thought, man, I want to be a godly husband or father, I don't know where to start, or you've heard that you need to do something to equip your family, but you just don't know where to begin, well, if this is you or anybody you know, Leading Well at Home will show you how you can love Jesus Christ, love and serve your wife and children, and take responsibility for discipling your family. You'll be encouraged and given action steps that you can apply so that you're moving forward. Okay, now let's jump into today's episode. Sam, I'm so excited for you to join us today.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on here, Eric. I'm very grateful.
Oh, it is my pleasure. Now, for those who are not familiar with the Green Ember series, tell us a little bit about it, because I know we're going to get into the new book, and I know we're going to talk about the writing course, but since I don't know if everybody has had the opportunity to read them, can you tell us a little bit about the series?
Sure. I'm super tempted to just make something up and tell people a completely false narrative about what's actually going on, but that's I think there's something in the Bible about that, so I'll probably just try to keep it straight. So the Green Ember stories were stories that started out with just my kids. I told my toddling daughter at the time just little stories about the rabbits that were hopping around in our yard. We lived kind of out in the country in West Virginia. And so the Green Ember was born from a very sort of organic, just like story time with daddy kind of time. And it grew over the years. It was just this sort of serial that we shared together. And eventually my kids were convinced, hey, daddy, you got to write this story down. And so we did and shared it with the world. And that's where we are today. But the Green Ember itself is kind of I don't know, you could think of it in broad strokes as maybe like a Lord of the Rings meets Zootopia. It's kind of it's a epic sort of medievalish low fantasy adventure. Think more Robin Hood than like Harry Potter or something that's like got a lot of fantasy elements. It's pretty like, bows and arrows. The main fantasy element is that they are rabbits. There's a hint of the miraculous or magical, but that's not really a main feature of it. So it's just like cool, good, clean, fun adventure. It kind of got an epic undertone, but I think parents really maybe identify with it because it's got a lot of depth of like heart and the stories kind of, I think, ring the bells of a lot of people, maybe particularly Christians. But kids also like it because it's just fun, adventure, fighting, rabbits with swords, that kind of thing. So that's maybe like a quick little intro about what I'm doing with my Green Ember series is all about.
No, and I appreciate that. And for those listening, I'll just confess they're excellent books. Our family has read them. My son enjoys them. I enjoy them. And it's just a good story. And so, I like, if you're listening, you just need to check these out. And so within the stories, because we'll get to the new one here in a second, but because that's like your 10th book. But within the storyline, you have like three different, I don't know the right term, like tracks, like however you want to call it. What are they? How did you come up with them? Was that like your plan all along?
That's a great question. Actually, I haven't really gotten asked that much about that, but it's such a central sort of feature. It's a little bit confusing. No, I didn't plan it that way, really. But there are four main books, we call them, like the main Green Ember series books, and those follow two characters. And then Heather and Pickett, this brother and sister kind of character, and that follows them all the way through. And those are like the four sort of pillar stories, maybe. And then there are there's a backstory trilogy, and then there's a side story trilogy. So if you think of it as a house, there's like well, it's not really. There may be a back door and a side door that's open in this house, and that analogy really breaks down, shows what an incredible communicator I am. But if you think of it almost like the old Natalia stories, the tales of old Natalia are kind of like an Old Testament. If you think about it, they're like stories. If the New Testament era was the main Heather and Pickett story, the Green Ember, Ember Falls, Ember Rising, and Ember's End, then the older books, the tales of old Natalia, Black Star of Kingston, The Wreck and Rise of Whitsun Mariner, and the forthcoming book. It's forthcoming, third in the old Natalia series and 10th overall in the Green Ember world. If we can just get more and more confusing with more numbers, those would be kind of like Old Testament stories that really inform the new ones. They're really alive. And actually, the recommended reading order that we have sort of is publication order, which isn't chronological, but it sort of takes you through. And I know people will probably have fallen asleep right now, but it is kind of a cool way to do it, because it's sort of like, I always like that. People say that, I love that just because I love the Bible, and I love how much, like, if you can read John and it's fine. Like, it's great. St. John, just read the gospel. It's like unbelievable. And even it's amazing because it's one of the most profound, deep, just actually incredible philosophically books in the history of the world. But people are like, hey, you don't know anything about Christianity? Hey, read the Gospel of John. It's like it's also incredibly accessible in a lot of ways. People can encounter Jesus in it. It's great. But if you read Genesis or the Pentateuch or the Old Testament at all, and then you read John, you're like, oh my goodness, this is like the fire comes on, and you're like, wow, this is unbelievable. You start to see all this stuff. So I like that kind of thing. And there's the old cliche is that history repeats itself. And I think someone wiser has adapted that. And I don't know who said it, but the history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And I love that. And I feel like that's what you get when you read the Gospels in light of the Pentateuch or a lot of the Old Testament. And that's kind of a little bit of the flavor, I think, that just, again, I didn't necessarily set out to do it, but that's the feeling that's what comes with it, that the history impacts the future, and these characters there's some recapitulation of themes and that sort of thing. That might be a little deep for most of my readers. Most of them, I think, a lot of my kid readers would just say, hey, it's fun. It's fun and exciting. But maybe there's a little more going on below the surface there that some adults with some experience might like be able to sink their teeth into, like both in their hearts and their minds.
I love that example too with like John and like Genesis and the Old Testament. That definitely, man, that reverberates so much, because you get the story, but then there's the story before the story, mm-hmm. and what leads up to it. And kind of with that too, it's with my son right now. We've been doing Lord of the Rings stuff through Tolkien, and he keeps asking these questions because like I've read the Silmarillion, and we're trying to talk through, and so it's that depth of story that is just really cool. I don't know how to say it. I mean, it's cool that you're like, oh yeah, we're going to tell what happened even before, and so I love that. I've
always liked stories like that too. I like Star Wars because it was a big universe that you could wonder, like, and it's famously kind of popular because of the whole used universe. A lot of sci-fi was so clean and everything, and all the edges, and it's like this world that we really can't imagine, kind of scary. But Star Wars came along with like dirty helmets and ruins and things, and that's really fun, I think. And Tolkien, like you said, is just a master of, like, there's so much of the story behind the story. And I don't know, even if it doesn't show up on the page of the story, it is so powerful to know when the author knows. I think it feels so much more lived in, more real. And I always wanted that. I always liked stories like that, and I wanted my stories to feel that way. So when an oath, when a sort of a call of loyalty comes out between these characters in the Green Ember, my mind is like, well, why do they say that? Who cares? Why do they care so much? And then I'm like, I've got to find out, where did that come from? And then that's a whole story about where it comes from. And that's really part of what happens. So it's a lot of curiosity, like, why is it like that? And then I start thinking about it. Sometimes it's just enough to where I have enough material to tell a story that feels rooted in a place and time. But then sometimes I get, it goes further than that. And I'm like, oh, well, I'll write a story about that. Sounds really cool. So I like that kind of, I like side doors being open. I like, well, where do we go there? And I like leaving those crumbs and those doors open here and there, just because I like that big universe to play in.
Yeah, I would agree, and I like that in other stories, and it is one of the really neat things in reading these books, that it's like, oh wow, in that depth, almost like that texture really comes off, that there is a lot to it, and there's a lot you don't know, and so but it happened. You actually believe, even if it's not recorded, some really cool stuff happened in the interim. So I love that. And that kind of leads us to the new book so it's coming out spring of 2022. Is that correct?
Lord willing, that's what we're working toward. And I just as of recording this today, I just finished a 5th draft of that. And working on it with editors, and I'm to the point where I am ready for it to not be in my hands anymore. I want it to be in other people's hands.
Oh, no doubt. Oh, now I don't know if it's, for public knowledge, can you share anything about it? Can you share the title? What would I didn't know anything that you would want to share about it, so that people will go out and pre-order it when they can.
Oh, sure. Yeah. Thank you. It is the 3rd in this Old Natalia series. So if you haven't, some people just read the main 4 books, and that's fine. They work. But if you get a chance, if you like those books, you'll like the other ones too. This Looking Back trilogy is kind of we can fall in love with these characters too. The Black Star of Kingston, The Wreck and Rise of Whitsun Mariner, and then this will be the 3rd one in that series, and the 10th book overall. It's called Prince Lander and the Dragon War, and it's really an ending. I like it a lot. It's a book. The backstories are a little more, I don't want to say masculine. I think maybe that's fair to say. They're a little more masculine. That the main books have probably the main character in the main books is the main point of view character is Heather, and then her brother Pickett, and they kind of together are sort of, it's a two-hander with them. But the older stories follow normally one character, and they're a little more just like, I don't know. I think of them as stories that boys might enjoy more. But maybe that's just like not a totally fair stereotype. I think it probably is fair, but anyway, there's just a lot of action, a lot of fighting, a lot of but this latest one that I just wrote, that Lord willing will be out in the spring of 2022, is it's really, I've never had as much clarity about what a story is about. Most of the time I just write it, like Tolkien talked about, sort of stories bubbling up from the leaf mold of the mind. I've not been super directive about, I've been directive about, I want these plot sequences to happen, and I'm trying to just get really into the world so that it feels very faithful. I'm not trying to teach anything or kind of like sneak any kind of stuff in. So I've almost stayed away from sort of thinking through, like, what is this about? I can kind of like later go look at it or hear from other people. Okay, I kind of see what the themes are, and really a lot of the themes of all the books together, the whole sort of saga, are really, I think they're a lot about keeping faith during chaos, and they're a lot about hope and sacrificial love. So I actually think that the series is a lot about faith, hope, and love. Which is like way more on the nose than I intended, but it's I think that's kind of the heart of it, really. But this book is about keeping faith, but it's about like how you keep faith. And I'm not saying, when I say faith, I'm not a capital F faith necessarily. I'm just talking about like these rabbits, they're keeping faith in a just cause, really. in sort of the side of right, whether it's painful or not. And they do that in this book. The main character, Prince Lander, has to think he has to think through, like, what does keeping faith look like specifically in relationship to his father. So it's a book about fathers and sons, which I've always loved books about fathers and sons. I love Star Wars. I love movies about the Karate Kid. I feel like so many movies and good stories that resonate with us are about sort of the failure or finding a new father, finding that sort of happens. I love the Karate Kid, and that kind of happens in that. This is a fatherless boy who finds a father in Mr. Miyagi. And there's this, it's a very deep, I mean, it's kind of, people think of it as a fun or cheesy, maybe 80s movie, but it's a very deep kind of story about longing. And so this is a story about a faithful son and what does it mean to be faithful? And does it mean to be faithful doing the exact same thing that your father did? Or does it mean following the same cause and the same values with the gifts that you have? And so it's really, I've never been that as clear as I am about what a story is about as I am for this story. So I've never talked this much about this book, but that's really what it's about. And I love it. I think it's like a tough book in a way, but it's got a lot of heart about sort of fathers and sons and families. And I think it's a good, my hope is that it's a good, faithful, encouraging, enjoyable finish to, and it is kind of a finish to the series in a way. I mean, I've got more ideas for the future, but this is kind of the end in a significant way. And I hope it's a good one.
That sounds neat. It sounds like with this one, you had an idea, a very clear idea. With the others, you almost wrote as the story took you. Is that something where and that's a little more technique, I guess, but is it something where you sounds like you had some goals, but not necessarily the path to get to the end of the road? Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think that I always, as far as that whole technical thing about writing, people have those sort of categories of being an outliner or a discovery writer, whether you're very intensely sort of an architect, is another term for it, where you build, what you're building, you got a big plan, and then compared to a gardener who's sort of like shaping as it goes, but you're letting it grow, and then and I'm more of a gardener than an architect for sure. The first book, The Green Ember, was so organic because I knew I was just telling it to my kids, and I knew, so when I sat down to write it, I knew the end, and I was writing for that end. So a little bit of a plan, but really, really open to a lot of discovery. And that's kind of how I write. And even this book, it was kind of the same approach. I think the difference about this one was the other ones, I knew what they were about story-wise, generally, as far as I knew what I thought I knew what I thought would be cool to happen. Like, here's the climax, and here's what this character's kind of going through, and the in-world stuff. But I hadn't thought so much about how that translated into my world, so that when readers read it, they're like, oh, this is about, fathers and sons, or this is about, I've mostly not thought very much about that at all. And I've just tried to tell a good, faithful story that was honest about the way sort of God made the world. That was truthful, even if it's the details of the story are not true, as in it's not a real event, but it's still truthful, faithful kind of thing, which I think is what Tolkien did so well. I think he believed the Lord of the Rings were true stories, and I do too. Not that the events happened as they say, but that they're faithful to reality, kind of with a capital R, is what he would say. And I want to do that. I want to tell faithful, true stories in that sense. But I've never been able to sort of identify, like, I don't know what there's different terms that people use, but sort of the story spine, or the, like, when you I've been having these conversations a lot too, when you adapt a book or something to the screen, and you go from, like, I'm the person who is doing two jobs as a novelist. I'm creating a story, and then I'm performing the story. So there's no actors involved with me. So you have to kind of be good at two things to be a novelist. You have to create stories. Like, you can do that. You can be great at that. But then when you actually have to perform it, you're like the actor for the plays, like you're going to have to do it all, and you might not be that good at that either. So we all have this mixture of skill sets. But when you're adapting it to a movie or show or something, or a play or whatever, then you have this whole new set of problems, as in like you've got, so if you're adapting it for animation, you've got 100 people, 300 people, whatever. I don't know how many people you have to actually say, this is the North Star about this. If you go off, if you don't understand that this story is about keeping faith in the midst of chaos, then every story decision we make as a team is going to be, we're going to be fighting against each other. You don't have to do that so much when you're a novelist, but you have to do it when you're adapting, which I'm kind of learning. But so I've never had that on the nose, that some people call it an armature, the armature of a like a sculpture or something. If sometimes you see those things, there's like a little wooden man with the joints, and you can kind of shape him into like what kind of a shape you want. Like it's basically sort of what's behind the story, like what's the heart and soul. And I think some people argue that you need to have a really strong one, like you have to have a basically kind of like a lesson, and a lot of Christians do this, I think, to our harm. I think for storytelling a lot, but there is in I think in filmmaking particularly is you got to do it because you got to keep everybody on the same page. So I've never been real clear on that in my own little performance, but I have been really clear on it in this one. And part of that is because of my own son, which is kind of ironic since the book is about fathers and sons. But my own son, who's 16 and an incredible storyteller, he's helped me so much with this book. And it was partly through talking with him about the book, and sort of I often will explain my story problems, or like, this is what I want. And we talk it through, kind of we'll take a walk near our home, and usually by the end of the walk, I've got like 50 ideas, and and it was really like getting clarity with him that I was like, I think I know what this is about. And it was super early on. And that was cool. It was a good experience. Maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm just growing as an author, or maybe I took a little detour here, but it was I hope that the result is that it's a good book that's generous, hospitable for the readers, because that's my mission, my heart, my aim, is I want to serve them in love.
Oh, I love that too. And especially that dialogue with your son, kind of learning through this, the whole process, you never quit learning as you go. It sounds like you're just continuing to just refine the craft and really just refine relationships too.
Yeah, for sure. That's true. It's so incremental. I was reading an article this morning about, I wish I could think of the name of the person who wrote it. This woman, actually, I probably can find it real quick. The title of the article is "How to Be Great, Just Be Good Repeatedly." And I like that approach so much because her name's Steph Smith. Okay. No relation, but Steph Smith. This article, and I haven't even finished reading the whole article, but I love that whole idea of sort of these modest little, like, sort of the old adage of like, you don't know when the frog is being boiled. Like you don't know, he's sort of, it's so slow that you don't even know that it's happening. And then eventually over time, I can't remember exactly how that cliche is normally expressed, but we have a lot of them around that, like slow and steady wins the race or whatever. But I'm such a believer in the power of habits and in the power of small, and the power of thinking small. I think sometimes we think I want to be a world-class author or filmmaker or communicator or whatever, artist or business person or inventor, but we don't think about like that mostly means doing really small things very faithfully for a long time and very modest goals. So I'm trying to like live my life like that. That's what's worked for me, is being faithful in small, disciplined ways. Like John Dryden said, we first make our habits and then our habits make us. And I think that there's nothing probably more powerful than to harness sort of the power of habits. Aristotle says you are what you continually do, that excellence therefore is a habit. And I just feel like that's so powerful. And so that little bit of faithfulness. So that's more, I don't feel like I have like this like endless quest to, I'm going to get so much smarter and so much better. It just feels very incremental, but being awake to that and alive to that. That feels like that's what being alive means. And I don't want to stop that. I want to stay alive and stay awake and stay open to the gifts that God's given me and the way that I'm supposed to be in the world. Like how do I, and it won't look the same. My dad used to say that, he was a preacher, my dad, and he is, and he would say, that it wasn't original with him, but he repeated it with meaning. I can't preach like Billy Graham, but Billy Graham can't preach like me. And I feel the same way about Tolkien and Lewis. And like, the world doesn't need another Lewis or Tolkien, or they would be here. Like, God is in charge of the world, and we don't. It feels to me like we need more of them. I wish that we had more of them, but I don't need to write like C.S. Lewis. That's impossible. And the world doesn't need that. The world needs me to write like me, like the best I can be with the gifts I've been given. And that does involve continuing to learn and grow. But I just want to show up. I just want to be faithful. I want to be alive. And that's part of what the Green Writer course is about too. It's the part of that green idea is like that I'm growing. I'm not yet what I will be. I'm becoming a person who creates and shares generous, excellent work. And that's what I want to do. I just want so being awake to that, awake to learning. I'm not done yet. Just because I have one book that kind of resonated, or a series that's resonated with people, like I want to still be alive to my calling from the Lord.
I like that sort of that continued that repetition, that growth, that movement. And is that so? What, as you mentioned it, what is the Green Writer course? Where did that come from? I guess what is it, and what prompted you to create it? Because that's I'll say a fairly new endeavor. Is that true?
Yes. I think it's only been a month or so that it's been out, and it's really the answer. So because of what's happened with the Green Ember, we've kind of have had, it's really resonated with a lot of people, a lot of families. And so I've gone on book tours kind of all across the country. I've met thousands and thousands of kids. I've gotten letters from thousands and thousands of kids. And a lot of these interactions, the questions are, I want to be a writer, and what advice do you have? And so I can't have a personal correspondence with all the kids who communicate with me. I wish I could. And at one point I did early on in this. I would write back every kid, a letter who wrote to me. And now I just can't quite do that the same way. But I care, and I want to answer that question. I want to say, because for a while I just wanted to show and not tell. I just wanted to do this. I didn't really want to be a writing teacher. I just felt like that was sometimes that could be like a lazy way for writers, like I put out one book, now I know everything, so I'll do a course and try to prey on the vulnerability of writers who are looking for anything to avoid actual writing. So I'll take another course, read another book or whatever, which is just like exactly the opposite of what I want, because the Green Writer is all about going and growing. So green, like green light. Not waiting for permission. I'm not waiting till I'm ready perfectly. I'm not waiting till the muse strikes. I'm not waiting till the fear is gone. I'm going. I'm going to show up. That's part of that, building that habit, that muscle memory of like, just like an athlete. Like you can't just say like, I've got a basketball block today, so I won't be able to practice. You got to go practice. Like that's how you get better. And same with writer. You can't say I've got writer's block, so I can't show up. Like, no, it's not a good excuse. So I'm going, and I'm growing. And so that the Green Writer is an answer to that question. Like, do you have any advice for me as a writer? And I think, yeah, I do. I do. And because there's a lot of love, like I feel a lot of love in my relationship to these readers. That's where the heart of it is sharing that. And so, yeah, I hope it's like how many 10, 11, 12, something like that sessions, maybe 13 sessions on some introductory kind of things. And it's really for all ages, but it's kind of for people who are moving from like, it's not for like little kids who are just like, I just want to write a little story and like just need encouragement, just like, good job. It doesn't matter what it is. Like, you just keep going, man. You're telling a totally incoherent, silly, crazy story with no threads, no conflict, nothing. That's fine. Just go. But when you get to that next level, like I'm thinking about, I want to share this with other people. I want to give a gift here. Well, like then let's start trying to discipline ourselves. Let's try to start thinking. Let's try to start learning some craft and stuff. So it's really introductory stuff, mixed in with a lot of kind of encouragement and a little bit of identity stuff about like kind of who I am. which is really where I want to go more, because I feel like that's even more rare, is artists sort of understanding where they fit in with God, and how maybe a Christian approach to the arts or to writing might be different in some ways. Like, for example, that love and service is better than fame and self-expression. Like, what does it drive us that we think, oh, I've got to express myself because I'm the center of the universe, and so everybody needs to kind of gather around as I express myself. Like, self-expression isn't the end of art; it's barely the beginning. So I'd like to later get more into that sort of. I'm kind of working on some stuff there on a project called Make Believe, like making and believing, sort of those two things. But sort of how to be a faithful Christian who's a storyteller or an artist. But this is almost like what you need to know before that, like some really basic things to kind of help you just jumpstart and go, like, inform and encourage as you just like get moving, and change from a person who like to talk about like, oh, I like to be a writer, or I have an idea, or I'm outlining, or to like, no, let's get to it. Let's start to get work, even in modest, small ways. But yeah, that's the Green Rider, and it's people can check it out for free. It does cost something. There's kind of a fair amount involved in it, but you can look at 3 of the sessions for free to kind of see if it fits your age. Like, a lot of people ask, what age is it for? Like, I don't know what your kids are, or is it okay for me? I'm an adult. I'm trying to, like, probably, I think so, but just check out the 3 free sessions, and you'll kind of get a feel for what the rest of it, and see if it looks like it's something for you.
I love that. You're kind of giving them some rails to run on, and then just giving potential writers some guidance, and really kind of encouraging them even to, man, just start messy, but just start and go forward.
Totally. Get good at being bad for a little while. Like everybody does at everything that they get good at eventually. Like, get comfortable being a little bit bad for a while and keep going, and try to have the humility to endure that stage of it, and which is hard, which is just derails almost everybody, and keep going. So yeah, I hope it's useful. I think it's pretty good, but yeah, we're getting a lot of good feedback on it, and a lot of people have done it and enjoyed it. So I'm grateful for that. It's kind of an answer to prayer.
Oh, that's awesome. And I love how you're talking about, because I think too, sometimes we can, especially in churches, in as Christ followers, sometimes we forget how to tell good stories, because, like you say, sometimes we feel like they have to be preachy. And so I love that you're helping them to think through those, and even in the future, as you're looking to encourage and equip some people with, even further training. I love that idea.
Yeah, it's insane that Christians aren't the best storytellers in the world. We have such a coherent story that accounts for reality in a way. It's crazy, totally. It's such a crazy story, but it accounts for reality in a way that I don't think any competing worldview or competing religion sort of can hold a candle to. It does account for reality in a way that's so faithful, and it's a storytelling religion, Christianity. I love it, and so I want Christians to feel equipped, and yeah, to not use storytelling as sort of a mere vehicle to just sort of smuggle in teaching and preaching, which is like super important. Teaching and preaching are so good, and I'm not saying they should never ever meet. Of course they should. They did with the Lord, and they can in a lot of ways. But there's also, I just think there's power in the vocation of storytelling. There's power to shape, and I think when so much of the Bible is full of stories, I think partly because it's not the most faithful storytelling is not a subtraction of truth. It's an addition of meaning. Because I just think you don't really have meaning. You don't even know what truth is. I mean, you can say, as a popular example, I use it a lot, but that God is powerful. But those words don't mean anything apart from the story, apart from creation, apart from the parting of the Red Sea, apart from many, many things that we read about in Scripture. And God is love, or Jesus loves the children, or something. Like, what does that mean? What do those words mean without a story? Like, we need a story to have meaning, and that's why we have narrative just throughout the Scriptures. And so I believe in the power of good stories. My friend Heidi Johnston says that the most faithful sort of biblically informed stories are not an escape from reality. They are an escape into reality. And I just believe that deeply. And I'm excited about the project of more people being awake to that. And the flip side is matters too, because if you're being sort of discipled by stories that are kind of hostile, toxic, then that has consequences for us, because we are shaped by stories, the stories we love. They're so powerful and profound. So I think it's important to guard our hearts in a way, not be like defensive and scared all the time, fearful about every little thing. Oh my gosh, that has there's something. I don't know, there's, the Bible would not exactly be rated G in and of itself. There's definitely a place for certain, for robust storytelling, I'll say, and it's different for each person, but I just think we don't need to be fearful. The Bible is a story that contains a lot of really cool fantasy elements, for instance, that are real. But so I don't think we should be afraid of those kinds of things, but I do think we ought to have our heads on and thinking, go in there with our hearts, set and kind of aware of what is. I have a friend, Indy Wilson, who says that stories are like catechisms for our bones. And I just feel like that we got to be aware of who is catechizing us deeply in that way, and not live out of fear, but just have an awareness. And I think we should invest in story and storytellers.
I like that too. Just being aware of what that worldview, what the intention of the author is. And I like how on your website you talk about talking about your stories. You talk about that the vintage adventure, moral imagination, and classic virtue. How would you qualify or define what is moral imagination and classic virtue, and what makes that so important?
Well, at Story Warren, we talk about holy imagination a lot. Part of the reason I give it that little qualifier is because the imagination is a capacity, just like our intellect. And so you could say this person was very smart or very intelligent, and that doesn't have a moral component to it necessarily. Hitler would be probably a very smart man, I think, certainly intelligent in a lot of ways. And so intelligence doesn't signal virtue, nor does imagination. A lot of times we say that child has a big imagination or something, and that's like supposed to be good. And like it can be, maybe it's bad though. Imagination's where most/all sin begins. I mean, it's in our imagination. That's who we are, really, is our imagination. Some people say, oh, I don't have an imagination. Of course you do. You do. We all do. But it's a capacity, and it's a gift from God, and it can be doxological, used to the praise of God, or it can be diabolical, and it can be used to oppose God, and it can be used to be for self. Like our imaginations are just a capacity. So moral imagination, I think, is important because it's and it's really reality. Like if you think about it, the whole sort of Christian project, the whole Christianity is about anticipating the kingdom of God's coming. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. That is a statement of imagination. It is about what we're longing for. Like we believe the kingdom is coming, and we long for it, and we pray for it. We're basically instructed to pray for the kingdom to come. And that's something that we can't see, but we must apprehend it. We must see it, and we must long for it. So that's the controlling feature of our lives in a way. I mean, we are living now in an ethic as Christians of a time that is coming. I know a lot of Christians are tempted to say, oh, back in the good old days, and back in this time, things were really good. Now they're really bad. And that's kind of true, kind of not. But like ever since the fall, things have been kind of up and down in a lot of ways. A real standard, the most solid thing we have to sort of guide our lives by is the future, is what is coming, is when the kingdom comes. And I think that's a product of imagination. And so I think it's just impossible for Christians to not emphasize and engage in that with that capacity. And I think we can grow it more, but it really needs to be a moral or a holy imagination. That's what we need to, it needs to, like our intellect, like everything else, like our physical capacity, it needs to come under the lordship of Jesus Christ. And I think that's a really, really worthwhile. It's not enough just to have imagination. We need to have a moral imagination. And I think these stories do that. I think these stories are a little part of that. I think they have a power in that sphere, and the classic virtue kind of a thing. I think that one thing that, again, I didn't plan this or anything, but some of the feedback has been, and I think it's true, is that these stories they're new stories with an old soul. They feel new and exciting, and sort of the pacing and the way that they're told, but they have sort of a classic virtue, sort of they feel like they come from an older time. Some of the virtues of the past, which I'm tuned into. I like sort of the classical education stuff, and thinking about sort of receiving an inheritance. So taking the best from the past to help us on our journey to that future, which is really our North Star. I think that's where those words come from. And I think a lot of people kind of understand that, even if they couldn't explain it perfectly well. I think they kind of get the idea of a moral imagination, but I'm a big advocate of not just the imagination, but of the moral or the holy imagination, because I feel like that's what's rare and that's what's important. If that makes sense.
No, that does. And I appreciate that, because I think sometimes we think imagination, we forget that, God has given us imagination, that, that didn't happen, accidentally, right? He is equipped, that God himself, in order, when he said, let there be light, and, he did all, everything in Genesis, 1 and 2, that is a beautiful, he came up with the color blue, right? Yeah. He just thought that up, right? Yeah. So I think it's important. I love how you talk about that, but taking that imagination, realizing it's from God, and then really submitting it to him and saying, okay, Lord, what would you have me do with this great gift that you have given me?
Yeah. There's a famous Chesterton quotation about fairy tales, and he just says that in the fairy tales, and I'm going to not get the words exactly right, but the idea is that in the fairy tales, the apples are silver or gold, so that we can remember that in the real world they're green. And in fairy tales, the rivers run with wine, so that we can remember in the real world they run with water. But the point is, both are fantasy, both is magic. Like, it's absolutely incredible. Like, it's no less astonishing that the rivers run with water. It's no less astonishing that we get food from the ground, and that we get people in this kind of amazing way, new people. And it's just, we already are in a fantasy world. Like, 100%, this is a fantasy world. And it would astonish someone who came and was like, you do what now? How does we get food? How do you get people? Like, what, water comes out of the sky? That's what you're saying? And even furthermore, you soar through the air to get, places. And it's just, we live in a fantasy world that would make Tolkien, make the characters in Tolkien absolutely freak out. You do what? And some of the things we have in common with them, but some of them we don't. It's just amazing. So we already have it. We already have this incredible technology. There's not too many stories where a magic wand is more powerful than the smartphone that is in your pocket or in wallet. We have access to information that would astonish people. So the world's already magical. It's already fantastical. And it's just a matter of acknowledging and being awake to that. And Chesterton is such a good guide. In I think it's chapter 4, maybe, I can't remember. He has a chapter called The Ethics of Elfland in his book Orthodoxy, which is just like for me, it's like a marching orders kind of a thing on the power of stories, and the power of stories to call us to be in faithfulness to Jesus Christ. And it feels like, man, if the Lord would grant me that in my life, to be faithful to him in modest ways over a long period of time, that he could bless and give gifts to lots of, especially kids, to share some light and some laughter and some goodness, truth, beauty, then that's just, the Lord's been saying yes to that prayer. And if he would continue to say yes to that prayer for the rest of my life, I would I believe I would whisper the end at the end of my story of this life with a lot of gratitude.
Oh, I love that. I do. And I know that everybody listening, man, I want that for them as well, to be able to do what God has called us to do, to use the gifts that He has given us, all for His glory. So, so just as we wrap up, because we could talk a long time. Unfortunately, we are hitting the end of our time. Listeners who want to know more about you, where to find your books, courses, where do you want them to go?
sdsmith.com is kind of got it all. The Green Writer course you can find there. It's at greenwriter.sdsmith.com, but SD Smith is like Samuel Dale, SD as in Dale, Smith.com is kind of easy place to find me.
Excellent. So if you're listening, we're going to put that in the show notes so you can check it out. Not only get the books that already written, but get the new one. I would encourage you also, make sure you order your books through the website.
That's very kind of you. Thanks for having me on. I really appreciate this. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, it was my pleasure. Thank you for coming on. This has been a gift. If you found this episode helpful, please leave a review for us wherever you listen to podcasts. Doing so will help others to find us. Check out the show notes for resource information. We encourage you to do that for links and other references. We'd like to hear from you, so you can message us your questions or comments on Facebook, Instagram, at Entrusting the Faith. You can email us at info@entrustingthefaith.com. If you go to our website, which is www.entrustingthefaith.com, you can sign up to our email list and receive free resources as well as upcoming podcast episode information. So check it out. Lastly, just remember, legacies are built a day at a time. So start now.